On the morning of June 4, 2010, 7-year-old Kyron Horman walked into Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, for a science fair. By the end of that day, he would be gone. There was no confirmed goodbye, no confirmed sighting after the morning, no confirmed explanation for how a 7-year-old disappeared from the middle of a school day. And 16 years later, the question remains the same. What happened to Kyron Horman? Today, the investigation is still open. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office says detectives continue to receive and review hundreds of tips, conduct searches, and examine the case with newer technology. In 2025, investigators completed the digitization of the case file, including thousands of pages of reports, photographs, and evidence. In 2026, the Sheriff's Office said detectives could now use technology to analyze more than 5,300 written documents and more than half a terabyte of data connected to the investigation. But before the case became one of Oregon's most enduring missing child investigations, Kyron was simply a 7-year-old boy going to school. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Someone watching might live near where this case began, and someone somewhere may still remember something important. Kyron Richard Horman was born on September 9, 2002, in Oregon. At the time he disappeared, he was 7 years old and attending second grade at Skyline Elementary School in Portland. According to the FBI, Kyron had brown hair, blue eyes, wore glasses, and had a distinctive V-shaped strawberry birthmark on his forehead. He was approximately 3 feet 8 inches tall and weighed about 50 pounds at the time of his disappearance. Those details matter today because the little boy who disappeared in 2010 would have grown up. Law enforcement has released age-progressed images showing what Kyron might look like at older ages. The FBI's current missing person page includes an age-progressed image to ages 19 and 20. But in June 2010, investigators were searching for a 7-year-old, and the last known morning of his life began with something ordinary: school. June 4th was a science fair day at Skyline Elementary School. Kyron was interested in the event and had prepared a science fair display about the red-eyed tree frog. According to accounts documented by the Charlie Project, he was brought to the school that morning by his stepmother, Terry Horman, rather than taking his usual bus. They arrived shortly after 8 a.m. The school was filled with the kind of activity expected on a science fair morning. Students, parents, teachers, projects, people moving through hallways. And somewhere inside that ordinary morning was a 7-year-old boy who would soon become the subject of a nationwide search. Kyron and his stepmother went through the school and looked at science fair projects. A photograph was taken of Kyron standing in front of his own project. The photograph would become one of the most recognizable images connected to the case. It showed him as he was that morning, a 7-year-old boy, wearing the black CSI shirt that investigators would later use in descriptions of the missing child. According to the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, Kyron was wearing a black t-shirt with the letters CSI in green and a handprint graphic, black cargo pants, white socks, and black Skechers sneakers with orange trim. He may also have been wearing his glasses. At approximately 8:45 that morning, Kyron's stepmother reported that she last saw him walking down a hallway toward his classroom. That time is one of the most important points in the official timeline, because after that, the certainty begins to disappear. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office identifies 8:45 a.m. as the time when Kyron was last seen by his stepmother. The FBI likewise states that Kyron was last seen that morning at Skyline Elementary School after attending the science fair. What happened after that is the central unanswered question. The school day continued. Classes began. But Kyron did not appear in his classroom. According to the Charlie Project, his teacher marked him absent after classes began and believed he might have been at a doctor's appointment. That small administrative detail would become enormous in hindsight. A child had disappeared from the school environment, yet the absence did not immediately trigger the kind of response that might occur if a child were known to have been taken from the building. There was no immediate alarm, no confirmed sighting that investigators could point to and say, this was the moment Kyron left, and no clear explanation for where he had gone. For several hours, the people around Kyron did not know that he was already missing. That is one of the most difficult aspects of the timeline. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Kyron was supposed to return home on his school bus. He did not. His father was expecting him. When Kyron did not arrive, the situation changed. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office records that at 3:30 p.m., Kyron failed to return home on his scheduled school bus. At 3:56 p.m., a Skyline Elementary School employee called 911. 3 minutes later, at 3:59 p.m., Portland Police and Multnomah County Sheriff's deputies were dispatched. By 4:33 p.m., officers and deputies had arrived at Skyline Elementary School and at Kyron's home. The search began. School grounds were checked. The surrounding area was examined. Kyron's home was checked. The first hours of a missing child investigation are critical, and investigators quickly began working to establish where Kyron had been, who had seen him, and what could explain his absence. Now that you know who Kyron Horman was, what detail about him stands out most to you? Tell me in the comments. Keeping Kyron's name connected to the person he was, not only the mystery surrounding his disappearance, matters. The response expanded quickly. By 7 p.m., the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office search and rescue team had been activated. At 8:15 p.m., the sheriff's public information officer met with media at the school. And between approximately 8:30 and 8:50 p.m., the sheriff notified the FBI. Within hours, what had begun as the search for one missing 7-year-old had become a major law enforcement operation. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office says the response eventually involved local, county, state, and federal partners. The East County Major Crimes Team became involved. The FBI became involved. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children became involved. The Multnomah County District Attorney's Office became involved. Investigators from other law enforcement agencies also assisted. The scale of the search reflected the seriousness of the situation. But size does not always produce an answer. The first question was simple. Where was Kyron? And the next question was even harder. How could a 7-year-old disappear during a school day without investigators being able to establish exactly what happened? The FBI later described the response as an extensive effort. In a podcast about missing children, the FBI explained that its agents partnered with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office from the beginning. Dozens of agents were involved in early neighborhood canvasses and interviews. The FBI also deployed specialists from its Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, digital forensics experts, and crisis management personnel. The Bureau also said it supported the investigation through its Behavioral Analysis Unit and national publicity efforts. That meant the search was no longer confined to one school, one neighborhood, or even one city. Every possible source of information mattered. People were interviewed, areas were searched, tips came in, and investigators attempted to reconstruct the hours surrounding Kyron's disappearance. But there was a problem at the center of everything. There was no confirmed answer to the most important part of the timeline. What happened after the morning of June 4? The case would become increasingly complicated as investigators examined the people, movements, statements, and evidence surrounding that day. But the playbook for understanding a case like this requires a distinction between what investigators established and what people later speculated. That distinction matters especially here. Kyron has never been found. No person has been convicted for his disappearance. And the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office continues to describe the investigation as open. That means theories surrounding the case must remain theories. The public has spent years discussing possible explanations, but an unanswered question is not the same thing as an answered one. The investigation has to be judged by evidence. And evidence is exactly what investigators have continued to seek. In the days after Kyron disappeared, the search expanded across the region. The FBI became heavily involved. Investigators interviewed people connected to the school and surrounding area. The case received national attention. The image of Kyron standing beside his science fair project circulated widely. His description was repeated across missing child alerts. A 7-year-old boy with brown hair, blue eyes, glasses, and a distinctive birthmark had disappeared. The clothing description was equally important. A black CSI shirt, black cargo pants, white socks, black Skechers with orange trim. Those details became part of the official search. Years later, the FBI still lists the same disappearance date and location. June 4, 2010. Skyline Elementary School, Portland, Oregon. The case did not simply disappear when the initial search ended. Instead, it entered the difficult period that defines so many long-term missing person investigations. The years began to accumulate. One anniversary became another. A child who should have been growing older remained frozen in photographs at 7 years old. Meanwhile, the investigation continued behind the scenes. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office has repeatedly emphasized that the case remains open. In 2024, the agency said detectives were continuing to work with the FBI, the Major Crimes Team, and the District Attorney's Office while using advances in software, digital forensics, and geospatial technology to examine leads. That statement is important because it shows that an old case is not necessarily a dead case. Technology changes. Databases change. Digital evidence can be revisited. Information that was difficult to process years ago can sometimes be organized differently, and investigators can return to old material with new questions. That became particularly important in 2025. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office announced a renewed collaboration and commitment to the investigation ahead of the 15th anniversary of Kyron's disappearance. Detectives were working to digitize and reorganize the entire case. Thousands of pages of reports, photographs, and evidence were being scanned and documented. Once that process was completed, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit would re-examine the file. The Sheriff's Office said the goal was a fresh and comprehensive review of the investigation. For a case that had existed for 15 years, that represented a significant shift. Instead of allowing the sheer size of the old investigation to become an obstacle, investigators were attempting to make the entire case more accessible to modern analysis. But even with modern technology, the central question remained: where is Kyron? Investigators had the school, the timeline, the photographs, thousands of reports, and years of tips. But the trail still had not produced Kyron. What do you think happened after he was last seen that morning? Share your theory, but keep it grounded in the verified facts of the case. There is another important part of understanding the investigation. The public often remembers a case through its theories. Law enforcement has to remember it through evidence. Those are not always the same thing. Over the years, many names and theories have become associated with Kyron's disappearance, but the playbook requires that publicly uncharged people not be treated as guilty. That distinction is especially important in a case involving a child. A person can be questioned. A person can be investigated. A person can become the subject of public attention. None of those things by themselves establish guilt. The official record continues to describe Kyron as missing, and without a conviction establishing what happened, the responsible way to tell this story is to separate documented investigative actions from theories. The search itself produced an enormous amount of work. The FBI said its agents conducted neighborhood canvasses and interviews during the early investigation. Specially trained agents were brought in. Digital forensic specialists examined information. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit provided assistance. National publicity efforts were used to keep Kyron's disappearance visible. The investigation became one of those cases in which the passage of time creates two parallel realities. For the investigators, the case remains an active file. For Kyron's family, it remains an unanswered absence. And for the public, it became a mystery that many people first encountered through a photograph of a smiling 7-year-old standing beside a science project. That photograph is powerful because it captures Kyron before the disappearance. Not as a case number, not as a missing person poster, not as an age-progressed image, but as a child standing beside something he had worked on for school. The official sheriff's office page still identifies the photograph as Kyron at the science fair on the day he disappeared. The image has therefore become more than evidence of where Kyron was that morning. It is also a reminder of who the investigation is about: a child, a son, a member of a family, a second grader, someone whose life should have continued far beyond that morning. For the first few days, the search was enormous. People searched. Investigators followed leads. Information was gathered. And the public watched. The FBI later described the search as involving a broad network of agents and specialists. But no confirmed discovery brought Kyron home. Eventually, the intensity of the initial search gave way to something much harder: time. Weeks became months. Months became years. And years became more than a decade. For a family, anniversaries are supposed to mark birthdays, graduations, holidays, and milestones. In Kyron's case, every passing year also marked another year without an answer. For 16 years, Kyron Horman's family has lived with an absence that never received a final answer. If you've ever waited for someone or for justice, you can share that experience in the comments. Sometimes acknowledging the waiting is part of keeping someone remembered. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office has continued to emphasize that Kyron has not been forgotten. In 2025, Sheriff Nicole Morrissey O'Donnell said the agency remained committed to bringing resolution to the case. District Attorney Nathan Vasquez also said his office had begun a methodical review with fresh eyes. Those statements were not presented as a claim that the case had been solved. They were a statement that investigators were still working, and that distinction matters. A cold case is not necessarily a closed case. A missing person is not necessarily a forgotten person, and a lack of public information does not necessarily mean investigators have stopped looking. That became even clearer in June 2026. 16 years after Kyron disappeared, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office announced that it had completed digitization of the entire case. Thousands of pages of reports, photographs, and evidence had been scanned and documented. The result was a digital case file containing more than 5,300 written documents and more than half a terabyte of associated data. The Sheriff's Office said new technology tools could now be used to process and analyze that material in new ways. Additional staffing had been assigned to the investigation. Detectives continued working with the District Attorney's Office, the FBI, the East County Major Crimes Team, and the Portland Police Bureau. And each year, hundreds of tips continue to arrive. Those tips are reviewed and considered for follow-up. Searches also continue. The reward remains $50,000 for information leading to the resolution of Kyron's disappearance. That means the investigation has entered a very different era. In 2010, investigators were working with the technology available at the time. Today, they have the opportunity to organize 16 years of material digitally and use newer tools to search for connections that may not have been obvious before. But technology cannot manufacture an answer. It can only help investigators examine what already exists: the documents, the photographs, the evidence, the statements, the tips, the timelines, the unanswered questions. The Sheriff's Office has described the process as working behind the scenes and following possible clues, and the agency has made clear that it intends to continue. We're now at the point where this 16-year investigation is being examined with newly digitized records and modern technology. Before you continue, What do you think investigators might discover by re-examining the old evidence with new tools? That question brings the story back to the morning of June 4th, 2010, because every investigation begins with a last known moment. For Kyron, that moment was at Skyline Elementary School. He had attended the science fair. He had been photographed beside his project. He had been seen by his stepmother. Then, at approximately 8:45 a.m., his stepmother reported seeing him walking toward his classroom. After that, the documented timeline becomes increasingly uncertain. His teacher later marked him absent. The school day continued. At 3:30 p.m., Kyron failed to arrive home on his bus. At 3:56 p.m., a school employee called 911. At 3:59 p.m., law enforcement was dispatched. At 4:33 p.m., officers and deputies arrived. By evening, search and rescue personnel were activated. The FBI was notified, and the investigation began expanding. Those times are not theories. They are part of the official timeline maintained by the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. But the timeline still has a missing center. What happened between the last confirmed morning sighting and the moment people realized Kyron had not come home? That is the space the investigation has spent 16 years trying to understand. And that is why the case remains open. The FBI still lists Kyron as a missing person. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office still lists his case among its open, unsolved cases. His age-progressed images remain available. His original description remains available. And the agency continues to accept information. Today, Kyron would no longer be 7. The FBI's age-progressed material shows how he might look as a young adult. But age progression can only show possibilities. It cannot tell investigators where he has been. It cannot answer what happened after that school morning. And it cannot replace the person who disappeared. That is why the photographs from 2010 remain so important. They preserve the last documented chapter of Kyron's childhood before his disappearance. A science fair, a classroom, a school hallway, a 7-year-old boy in a black CSI shirt, and then silence. The case also demonstrates something difficult about missing person investigations. The most important clue is not always a dramatic piece of forensic evidence. Sometimes it is a gap, a missing time period, an unanswered question, a person who should have been somewhere but was not, a child who should have walked into class but never appeared, a bus that should have carried him home but arrived without him, a phone call to 911 that changed the entire course of an investigation, and a family waiting for a phone call that has never brought the answer they need. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office says its commitment remains strong. In 2026, the sheriff said Kyron's family had lived through birthdays, holidays, and other moments that marked the passage of time, while emphasizing that the child had never been forgotten. The district attorney said that a lack of news did not necessarily mean a lack of progress. Investigators are still following possible clues. That is where the case stands today. Not solved, not forgotten, still open, and still waiting for the piece of information that can transform a 16-year-old mystery into an answer. There is no responsible way to tell you exactly what happened to Kyron Horman. No verified source can provide that conclusion. What can be said is this. Kyron was 7 years old when he disappeared. He was last seen at Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, on June 4, 2010. He had attended the school's science fair that morning. He was wearing a black CSI shirt, black cargo pants, white socks, and black Skechers sneakers with orange trim. He had brown hair, blue eyes, glasses, and a distinctive V-shaped strawberry birthmark on his forehead. He did not return home on his scheduled school bus. The school called 911. Law enforcement responded. The FBI became involved. A massive search followed. And despite 16 years of investigation, Kyron has never been found. In 2025, investigators began modernizing the case file. In 2026, The sheriff's office announced that digitization had been completed and that new technology would be used to examine more than 5,300 documents and more than half a terabyte of associated data. That does not guarantee a breakthrough, but it means the case is still being worked, and that matters, because there is a difference between an unanswered case and a forgotten one. Kyron Horman's case remains unanswered, but it is not forgotten. If someone watching this knows something small, something they dismissed years ago, something they have never reported, or something that has only recently become clear, the official investigators still want to hear it. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office continues to accept information at 503-988-0560 or tips at MCSO, US. A $50,000 reward remains available for information leading to the resolution of Kyron's disappearance. The FBI and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children also continue to provide avenues for information. 16 years have passed since a 7-year-old boy walked into a school for a science fair. 16 years since his family expected him to come home. 16 years since the search began. And somewhere inside thousands of pages of reports, photographs, evidence, tips, and unanswered questions, investigators are still looking for the connection that explains what happened. The last photograph shows Kyron as a 7-year-old. The age-progressed images show what he might look like today. But neither image tells us where he is. That is the unfinished part of this story. And until there is an answer, the case remains open. Kyron Horman is still missing. If you have credible information about Kyron's disappearance, contact the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office at 503-988-0560 or tips at mcso.us. The $50,000 reward remains available for information leading to the resolution of his disappearance. Every case deserves an answer. Every family deserves the truth.